Welcome everybody to today's Mental Health Kwentuhan, where we have a conversation about mental health within our Filipinx household. So hi, I am Rovie. I will be your co-moderator in the first half of this video, and Chachie will join us in the second half. Today we have 3 people from around the world. We have people from Canada, California, and New York, so we're excited to have a mix of people here. So let's get started with our episode.
Okay, cool. Thanks for having me. My name is Athena. I go by she, her pronouns. I am currently in New York City, in Lower Manhattan, but I am originally from the island of Kauai in Hawaii. I am currently a graduate assistant at the Cooper Union, and I also go to grad school. I'm a master's student in the higher and post-secondary education program at Teachers College Columbia. It's nice to be here. Also, I have like this snack box that I got from a friend back home that they sent me a bunch of snacks. So I guess I could be like snacking on it as we go on, but it's like 10:30 p.m. here. So no big meal, no lunchtime. Yeah, nice to meet you all.
Yeah, thanks for that beautiful introduction, Athena. Hi, everyone. My name is Jovi. My pronouns are she and her. I'm also in Eastern time, so it's also 10:30 p.m. in here. I'm calling in from Toronto, colonially known as Toronto in so-called Canada. I am the founder of Pinay Collection, a merch line that celebrates the Filipinx identity. I hope my sweater is okay today. If not, I'll change. But it is usually my speaking sweater. And yeah, I also as my full-time job, I also run a team of youth settlement workers supporting newcomer Filipino youth here in Toronto. So grateful to be here. And since it's really late in the evening, I have my clemency iced tea and really tiny versions of lumpia, which I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to eat, but yeah, they're way shorter. Thanks for having me again.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Again, it's an honor to be with everyone and meet y'all, especially in this context. My name is Jeren Peñalosa. My pronouns are he, him. I am coming from the Bay Area, also on the stolen land of the Ohlone people. I am currently a first-year teacher. I teach at James Logan High School. I teach ethnic studies, I teach Asian American studies and world studies. And I'm currently graduating in my master's program in urban education and social justice at the University of San Francisco. And I am currently, it's only around 7:37 over here in the Bay Area. But I try not to eat past 7, like for fasting hours. So I'm just drinking water and staying hydrated. But it's an honor to be with y'all and meet y'all in this context. So excited to have this conversation.
Great, thank you for your introduction, and thank you everybody for introducing yourselves. We're excited to have you here, and it's nice to know a little bit more about you guys. So I will be the host for the first half, so I'm just going to ask a general question about mental health, and then later on Chachie will jump in and kind of tie it in, make it more specific to the Filipinx experience. So I was reading about your bios and a little bit about what you guys do, and it's great that you guys are all community organizers, and it's important to kind of like start and bring these people together to make mental health a more prominent awareness in society. So we wanted to know, how did your mental health journey begin and why is it important to you now?
I'll start off, if that's cool with folks. Well, my mental health journey, I studied psychology in my undergrad. And my undergrad journey started in the Philippines. I grew up in the Philippines, born and raised in Nueva Ecija. And I went to university when I was 16 because back then there was no K-12 education system. So I studied psychology, and that's when I really started to realize how important mental health is and how taken for granted it is in our culture at the same time. Yeah, in terms of mental health, it's a huge part of my identity and how I hold myself and how I hold space for others, how I organize, how I advocate, and how I fight for my rights and the rights of my community. It really is a huge part of who I am. It includes the way I talk, the way I present myself, the way I care for myself, my psychological, social well-being, and it affects how I think and how I am out there in the world. So I think for me, the way I value it is by not valuing it. I think I'm doing a disservice to myself. I'm doing a disservice to my community, to my circles, to my peers, and to the people that I fight for. As a Filipina, as a person of color, my career has been focused on showing up and advocating for other people and for those who are marginalized specifically. And by not addressing mental health in this work, I think it's just a huge missed opportunity. And it's just such a huge piece of um, of the work that we all do, I think, in this space, in the community that we are all in. I don't know if that makes sense. I think I just blurted out a whole bunch of words.
Jovi, I really like how you said that mental health is how you hold space for others, because I really resonate with that. And I think like community has been such a big part of my personal mental health journey, and realizing, what things are impacting me and what my needs are to maintain my own mental health and self-care. I think definitely when I moved away from the islands of Kauai and Hawaii over to my new home in New York City when I was an undergraduate in college. So about like 5-ish years ago. I think that's when it really shocked me that I felt uprooted, I felt isolated, I felt like in a whole different space, especially a person of color, a Filipino woman in a predominantly white institution and predominantly white spaces. That's when I started to take my mental health more seriously and definitely care for myself and care for others within my own personal networks and communities, and really prioritize, self-care, community care in a way that's both impactful as it's productive, but also as a way to like celebrate yourself and celebrate the person and the identities that you hold. And I think like that's something that has been very special to me as I've explored different tactics and skills and coping mechanisms and whatnot within my mental health journey. I think I'm the youngest on this call, so I'm definitely, still learning, as we all are continuously still learning and helping each other learn. So yeah, I'm grateful to be on this journey.
Yes, I love both of your responses. I definitely resonate to that key component of collective care. But I think for me, like both of you, starting off our journeys somewhat later in our lives, like towards our undergraduate, early adult. And I think this question is interesting to me in the sense that I like truly believe like our mental health and our wellness is nothing, it shouldn't be considered something additive or additional, but it's always there. And I think when we start to recognize and start to develop the tools and framework to understand our own, self-care and ways to navigate our own traumas and our own health, I think that's when that question starts with, when does that journey start? And so for me, similarly, it started in undergrad as well. Growing up in a household, mental health was never a conversation with my Filipinx parents. Understanding their own cultural differences and struggles coming as immigrants from the Philippines. And so talking about mental health and stress of, especially school and going through life experiences was never something that I was open to really discussing or identifying. And so for me, I started to reflect upon my own high school experiences and being a young adult, going through depression, going through my first family death, going through a loss of family, and all of these different experiences that I started to recognize that I was never aware or taking care of my mental health. And it wasn't until undergrad when I went to San Jose State that I was surrounded by my community, by my own people, especially people of color, like Athena said, within that white colonial institution that we need to take care of each other. And it wasn't until that I started to recognize, my toxic behaviors or these tendencies, or identifying the reasons why I was the way I was, and started to take hold and recognize what I needed to do to take care of myself and really grow in my mental health. And so definitely agree with both of y'all of like starting that journey like really into college and as a young adult.
Yeah, that's great. I really love that. You know, you guys are all community organizers, and within your answers, there all seem to be that kind of importance of the community in relation with mental health. And I think by speaking more about mental health and making it more prominent in the community kind of makes individuals more comfortable with realizing and prioritizing mental health and their self-care, especially because it is a topic that is always there, like Jeren said. And especially with the conversations that are happening between the community, like what we're doing now, we learn from each other. And by sharing this, we kind of like help others realize the issues that and help and how they can help deal with it. So you guys talked about the community, and now we kind of wanted to focus it more on ourselves and like within specifically the Filipino community and within our families. So I will have Chachi, I will turn this over to Chachi and she will join in and ask the next questions.
Thank you everyone for sharing. It was very wholesome of you guys to share out. So starting with the main question is, how did you understand your Filipinx culture and identity?
Yeah, I love that question. So for me, growing up as a second generation Pinoy in the Bay Area, I literally thought that just being Filipino, just going to Filipino parties, eating Filipino food, knowing the flag color was really all that was to being Filipino and understanding my culture. And growing up, I really had this strong colonial mentality and assimilation to America, because of my immigrant parents wanted to really assimilate and not have their children experience racism, and really just wanted to fit in. And so for me, I really just identified of being American at that time as a young adult or as a young kid. And I really grew up hating myself and hating people that look like me. And a strong colonial mentality, like anyone, any Pinoy, Filipina, anyone that looked like me, like I just like, why can't we just be more American, right? I would call people fobs at school. I would shame people for speaking our language, and I didn't take our culture seriously. And I had the privilege of taking 3 years of Tagalog in my actual high school, and I think there's maybe 3 high schools in across America. I think that's assumption, but I don't think there's many schools at all that have the opportunity to teach Tagalog, and I did. And even when I took an ethnic studies course my freshman year, I didn't really care about learning what it meant to be Filipino. I really pushed away my identity. I was really rooted in self-hate, and so even in all those history classes, not seeing myself reflected, and learning, having that Eurocentric curriculum, I was really pushing myself further because of my teachers, my curriculum, and just that colonial institution in itself. And so it wasn't until undergrad that I really started to redefine what it meant to be Filipino American for myself, what it meant to be Pinoy. I got involved in the Filipino American community organization, or community organization called Akbayan SJSU. I eventually, joined a grassroots organization in San Jose called Lead Filipino. And then I had the opportunity to teach Filipino A and X experiences in ethnic studies in San Francisco. And so it wasn't until like undergrad where I really wanted to redefine what it meant to be Filipino. And I had to re-love myself and find that love for myself, because growing up, I was really pushing that away. And that's how I found my purpose of becoming a teacher and becoming an ethnic studies teacher, because I recognized how beautiful our people, our history, our resiliency, our culture was. And I wasn't able to get that because of that self-hatred that I was getting within the system. And so that's where my journey for self-love of being Filipino and our people and our culture really started. Then it was like a very long journey of self-love and redefining. Um, but yeah, so that's just like a glimpse of that whole journey.
Thank you for sharing, Jaren. Thank you for sharing your story, especially. I feel like all of us can relate to that aspect because, like, especially with having immigrant parents, we have this sense of we all have this colonial mentality where even if we're surrounded with the culture itself, it's not until we really take the time to reflect on our history and really reflect back on our roots to see how it is in person. I'm kind of curious to what both Athena and Jovi would like to respond as well.
Sure, yeah, I can go next if we're going backwards. I definitely also relate to that my discovery of my Filipino identity came later and towards undergrad. I was originally, born into a family that's like deeply Catholic, and and I still maintain that Catholicism, and that's still something that's strong to me. But that's like where I first, interacted with the Filipino culture, that and its traditions. And I never really got to know the alternative histories and stories or indigenous people and like various other histories that is lacking when we don't have ethnic studies as a core piece of our curriculum when we're growing up. So as Jeren said, thank you for being a teacher in ethnic studies. That is amazing. So yeah, when I went to undergrad at Columbia University, I also joined a club, Liga Filipina, and through the people who I've met there. And I personally come from an Ilocano family. My parents are from Ilocos Norte. So I definitely Filipino, what being Filipino to me was kind of different to what being Filipino was to, the Jersey Filipinos whom were mostly like Tagalog or spoke Tagalog and whatnot. So that was different to me, and exploring the differences and exploring the similarities and the just love and passion we have for our community and our culture together with the organization at my institution, and then later when we interacted with more organizations throughout the city, I really got a chance to learn more about our culture and our history and like the deep bonds that we share in our collective struggle, and that just sparked that inspiration in me to keep learning and to keep growing in what it is to be Filipino, Filipinx. And it's also like looking up to a lot of older folks who came before me, generations, or even like the scholars who are in the Filipino American or who are Filipina or Filipino American within my field has been really awesome because I get to like explore my own academic and personal and professional interests, but also explore them like alongside other Filipinos and what it means for them to be Filipino in a certain area. So yeah, that's been exciting for me, and I've just been, reflecting on my journey.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing that. Yeah, I totally relate to a lot of what you folks said. My experience is a little different just because I was born and raised in the Philippines. I spent 18 years of my life there. So from the get-go, right from day one, I knew what my identity was, and that was fairly clear to me until I immigrated to Canada. I came here when I was 18. It was such a formative age of my life, and immigration and yeah, the process of immigration had a lot of I've as a result, it brought a lot of circumstances, it brought a lot of confusion, it brought a lot of many different feelings that I've never felt before, a lot of many different doubt about my identity, because all of a sudden I'm in this town of 7,000 white people and we're the only Filipino family, or so I thought, right? So there's a lot of isolation, a lot of feelings of am I allowed to be Filipina? Am I allowed to be who I am, or who I used to be, or who I was proud of? So all of that came crashing out of the window. But then reclaiming my roots came a few years later after I've come about and settled into my feelings of isolation. Years after when I met my community and when I met more people who've gone through the same stories of migration that I've gone through. That's when I realized that as a first generation immigrant Filipina, my identity has a lot of nuance. It has a lot of layers upon layers of joy, of resistance and pain and trauma all at the same time. And that's when I started devoting my work into the Filipino community here, understanding more of what migrant Filipinos go through as they settle here in so-called Canada, as they go through unfair immigration processes, as they sacrifice and face inequities while trying to build a better life for themselves and send money for their families back home. Um, my culture and identity as an immigrant Filipina is definitely built in resistance of the revolutionary Filipinos, Filipinx that came before me. But at the same time, I'm still in recognition that to this day, as you both have mentioned, this culture, this heritage is highly influenced by colonialism and white supremacy. And for me, realizing how I used to be ingrained in white normativity, and I still am to this day, and calling out the harm that I've caused for dwelling into colonial mentality is a huge part of my being. It's a huge part of reclaiming my roots, of telling myself that I can be Filipina again. Um, my Filipina identity is definitely so much more than food, although we have undeniably amazing cuisine. Um, it's also about continuously learning ways in which I can build connection and supports the homeland despite being here, despite being far away. It's about acknowledging my privilege and ways that I've upheld model minority. It's about paying back, giving the land back, and doing all that I can to support and be in solidarity with Black and Indigenous communities here in Turtle Island and in North America. It's about understanding the complexities and inequities that we all face, that migrant Filipino face, the first generation, second generation Filipino face overseas. I think my Filipino identity comes with rich experience. It comes with beautiful community. It comes with so much pain and so much trauma to unearth and so much trauma to heal. But in a way, that's what's make it beautiful. And I'm sure that's what makes it complex and beautiful for so many of us as well.
That was actually very lovely, Jovi, and thank you so much for sharing. And especially because in this panel, we have Jeren and Athena who were born here, and then it's really nice to have the representation of you and I also who are born in the Philippines and who immigrated here, and it goes to show how being a Filipinx, Filipino, we we go through so much only to really understand our history and really unravel a lot of the deep trauma that we kind of our ancestors went through. So if you guys wanted to actually make comments to anyone that you just said, feel free to do so before we move on to the next question.
I think this is more like a general comment, but I'm really enlightened and inspired by both of your just experiences, and it's so weird for me still to just connect with people through Zoom and just through this online platform. But I'm just like really honored, and I'm like always just snap into all both of your responses, and I'm just really enlightened to really learn and be inspired and motivated to bring all of this learning back into my community. And so I think that's the beauty of this learning experience and this conversation tonight. So I know this is like only the beginning, but I appreciate what we've been talking about so far.
Yeah, same here. Thank you both for being in this space. I mean, thank you, Chachie, for organizing this.
And any last words, Athena?
I mean, I'm also appreciative of sharing this space alongside you all. I mean, Filipino culture and our Filipino identity is not just food. And obviously, like if we're all together in an actual like place in person together, we would be eating, we would be, you know, sharing stories. But now that Zoom has got this like physical distancing in place, like it's really great to delve into these conversations more deeply, and be able to still have that space when that food or that like dancing and whatnot is gone. We still have this community.
With that said, thank you guys for sharing the first question. Next one is, what values did you grow up with, and how has it shaped your understanding of mental health?
I can start. I shared a little earlier about how I grew up in a Catholic family, and I think that has, you know, shaped my ideas of mental health. I think oftentimes when I was growing up, like the focus of, you know, healing yourself and thinking about healing was always like funneled in on, you know, prayer, lean on God and trust in God, and that's, you know, that's the solution. And I felt myself, one, like comforted by that, but also like searching for much more. And I know like that in my family, or in back home when I was younger, I think like things like depression and anxiety was such a stigma, or like an untalked about talked about idea or concept. And it's like something our parents often had to like push down, and pretend that they're like okay, and that they, you know, are in a positive headspace to be able to take care of us. And I think I adopted that a lot, and it's been a wild journey trying to realize like the characteristics I've adopted from my parents. And I think that's like one of the biggest things. But you know, as I grew up and as I got more independent and am a young adult now, in grad school, I've been thinking more about and reflecting upon these ideas of mental health, both like the silence that surrounds mental health within our communities, and you know the our approaches to mental health. And I'm now seeking therapy, so it's been an amazing, you know, journey, because that's not something I like thought about growing up, because it's not common, and it's also sometimes not accessible to our communities when we're younger. So I really am an advocate for exploring these different options of mental health resources, away from, you know, what away from just like prayer only.
Can I just say, Athena, thank you for bringing that up, because I think there's a lot of complexities in being able to admit that you practice, you know, this religion, while recognizing that this religion is pretty much one of the largest symbol of colonialism in our country, but still being very radically progressive in the way you view life and the way you advocate and the way you organize. So I think that type of conversation is very much needed, because oftentimes you see folks that are like, oh, I'm not practicing Catholicism anymore because I'm radical. But there are so many folks and so many in our community that's still in between, that still practices that faith, but still can be radical and recognizes the harm that that same religion has brought upon our community. So I just want to say thank you for bringing that up. And unless Jeren, do you want to go, or yeah, okay. I guess for me, I'll just go into my value. I think the value of bayanihan, huge piece for sure. I think it taught me that family, community, healthy and beautiful relationships come in many different ways, and not just come from romantic relationships, you know, that you can be nourished by many different people around you, whether you're involved with them romantically or not, whether you're in a platonic relationship with people. That love that you build within that relationship is also as valuable. The way I understand bayanihan is it's a piece that uplifts each other. It's a way of caring for one another, that no bad thing can come from showing up and giving care to your community. And And it taught me that we're truly not alone in this world. And it taught me how to create the community that I am creating now, and how to be invested in that community, and believing in people and taking care of each other, and how we keep each other safe. Um, to this day, the way I care for and love those around me, I think is rooted in that value, the value of bayanihan, and that involves um, having and knowing that real sense of empowerment exists within the community that you create.
Yes, thank you for that, Jovi. I really love that value of the Bayanihan spirit, and Athena like touching upon religion. And like that's something that like I like stopped to reflect upon, connecting to what Jovi said, because like I stopped like the moment I started learning about why my family and ancestors were Catholic, I'm like, oh hell no, right? And so that's what pushed me away from the church. But similarly, right, my experiences growing up is very, very complicated. I would say the values that I have now as an adult is way different than what you would see from a young Jaren's perspective. Um, the first aspect was Catholicism. I grew up, going through church, going through, we call it CCD, youth group. And I was really involved in it. And um, I have no shame to say like that was a huge part of my life, and the people in the community that I was really with was important to me. And my faith at that time was a key component to understanding care and understanding, prayer and faith to God as a way to connect and really understand my own health, and also form of care. Um, but I started to stray away from that later in high school. But growing up in a cis hetero patriarchal family, with my Ilocano father, right, being this man of the house concept, with two other brothers and an older sister, really pushed me towards with these like toxic masculine traits of keeping my head down, like be tough, what did it mean to be a man in a cis hetero world and society of that privilege in its sense. And so that toxic masculinity really pushed me away from like not showing my emotions, not showing or talking about my feelings. And so that's what's kind of really messed with me growing up, of understanding my mental health, because like I said at the beginning, like mental health was never a conversation in my family. um, we didn't talk about our feelings, we didn't talk about our emotions. And so I really bottled all of that up. And I mean, school and my friends were a safe haven, but I wish having that kind of conversation and love in my own family um, is one of those cycles that like I recognize for my future, right? I mean, sometimes with our own families growing up, it's some of those values don't translate to what you want in your future. And so that's the second aspect. And the third was all about the respect of our elders and always putting our head down, to not complain. And so growing up as a second gen in America, I recognize my privilege, um, understanding, what my parents, what my grandparents sacrificed and gone through for me to live, for me as a living dream, right? They're living their dreams through me, as their own future, right? And so I understand that privilege and respect, but I think there's also that hard struggle of understanding that our parents' experiences, it was completely about survival, or in my case, survival, coming from the Philippines, leaving everything and family behind for a better life. And so my privilege is to recognize that I want to do more than just survive, but thrive with what I have the privilege to do so in America. And so sometimes those values of like wanted my parents wanting me to live up to the expectations of wanting to be a doctor, an engineer, a nurse was not what I wanted to do. And so I feel like I feel like a scapegoat, or I feel like the outlier in my family, because I'm one of the only few that pursued it something different than what they wanted, and straying away from that. And so especially in the American school system, right, and we're also taught this whole idea of meritocracy, um, individuality, tying it to capitalist a capitalist society. And so I was all about like working hard, growing up to just do me, you know, not worry about anyone else. So the lack of community and lack of community care really was hurting me. And I think that's what I grew up. And so all of those different toxic masculinity, Catholicism, um, respect, politics of elders, meritocracy, and from surviving to thriving has all really like shaped my very unique and difficult time as a young Pinoy in America. So yeah.
I just wanted to add on that thank you for sharing. Thank you guys for sharing. And one thing that I kind of grabbed from each of your guys' responses. I'm gonna go backwards. So from Jeren, like how you had two different values from younger to older, and then kind of tied into how growing up we have this Filipino is known to be Catholic. So also like when it comes to getting to like growing up, like our family kind of put this kind of thing on us that you have to go to church, you have to believe um or going to Catholic school. And so once you grow up going to college, undergrad, you have different kind of values that make you want to question the things that you grew up before. So I guess coming from everyone is that I just had a brain fart. I'm sorry. Um, I really did have a brain fart. Oh, does anyone?
You're good. I mean, I can recap by saying I really appreciate the question reflecting on our values. I mean, as Jeren touched upon a little, is like thinking about the values that we had as a child and thinking about like, you know, what we want to carry on into the next generation. So like, as Jovi said, that Bayanihan spirit, that's definitely one main component that I want to take away and from our Filipino culture and carry on to the next generation. So, you know, thinking like weeding out the bad aspects that has formed us, and you know you have to give it credit where credit is due. That's like what made us who we are, but then you know to better shape the experiences of our next generations, thinking of what values we want to set in place.
Yeah, and a huge part of it too is learning from the negative ones, or learning to reimagine what utang na loob is, or like what is, you know, debt to oneself or to your family, sacrifices. How can you, you know, still be happy and while and you know, how can you still be happy while letting your family know that what you see as success is not what I see as success, you know? So balancing those conversations and navigating through a life that is assuring that future generations beyond us don't have to struggle and don't have to hide who they really want to be just because they're scared of um, of of not being the person that their family wants them to. Yeah, I think even that sense of utang na loob and that theme kind of came up out of what everyone just said. And it's also a huge, it's also a value. It's recognized as a value in our community, but it comes with so many toxicity. It comes with many layers of, you know, negative connotations to, especially to those to younger generations like us.
Yes, I 100% agree. I love that. And it made me think of this one comment that one of my friends recently talked about. And they had an issue when we talk about like breaking the cycles of this colonial mentality, these cycles of racialized trauma, and all of these different forms of trauma, like really that we internalize as Filipinxs. Um, and their issue or take on it was that when we say like, you know, when we talk about the negative aspect and experiences that we have to go through, and say like we have to break the cycle, they were saying like we also got to recognize that our our parents, our grandparents, and generations before us have been doing that work, right? We wouldn't have this long lasting resiliency and strong culture if they weren't doing those same things. Um, I mean, you know, we're obviously continuously learning intergenerationally. And for them, like that was probably the way of survival in their context, like depending on, you know, what part of the Philippines or where they were growing up. And so obviously with that context specific, as well as just understanding like the cycles that are passed down, but we also have to try to break, um, just means that, like, you know, even when we break it down for our own future children or family, like we are not necessarily going to be the ending point that breaks the cycle, but it's a continuation. And I think that put me in perspective of like not just blaming my parents for like not trying to you know, not trying to untangle this toxic trauma and colonial mentality, but they probably did, and they probably tried throughout their, you know, their life in the Philippines and in America. But it's always like a continuous battle, and so I think that's what I thought about with both of y'all's conversation on that.
Finally remembered, and thank you, Jovi and Athena and Jaren, for like that beautiful sum up. I one what I was going to say is that with everything, with the values that we grow up with, and especially from our parents who have gone through so much, and we can see it from the generation that's currently happening, that they want to essentially ignore um what our parents kind of went through. Like, why are they being hard on us, why are they doing this and that? But if the more that we try to kind of run away from this idea of I just want to I just want to kind of go on my own, it kind of still pushes you to want to kind of reclaim that part of sense of I want to understand them instead of running away. In sense, like, so I am the question was, how do you set those boundaries of taking care of yourself and your
By being brutally honest. I think it is a privilege to find one's voice and to build the I'd say the audacity or the tenacity to call out people and hold people accountable for the harm that they've done. I recognize that, and it doesn't come easy. Um, but by calling out injustices, inequities, whether small or big, as they happen to me, around me, the people I care for, my family, my community, for me, that is an act of love. That is my way of setting boundaries. Um, I know that not everyone can speak up and not everyone can be at that stage, but um, the fact that I feel comfortable calling out this wrongdoings and holding folks accountable in a way that, of course, um, is in a way that is of aligned to restorative justice, in a way that continues to build community and holds community. That is, for me, a really huge part of caring for one another and for myself and setting my boundaries. um, I think there's still a lot of folks in my circle, especially in the Filipino family, and by Filipino family, Filipino community, who does not get it, because when you call out someone else, you're automatically that negative person. You're automatically that person that is like a chismosa, or that person who is like always got something bad to say. But I'm trying my best to reform that thinking and tell people, explain to people that it takes a lot for me to call you out. It takes a lot for me to let you know that you're harming other people. And by me doing this, it's an act of care. By me doing this, is letting you know that I love you, that I want a better space for you. I want a better space for me and for the community in the space that we are in. So yeah, I think that's my short-ish answer.
Yeah, I can add on to that if that's good, Athena. I love that, and I 100% agree, because that's exactly what I was going to build upon. That whole like notion of calling out or calling in, right, these injustices and those accountabilities. And for me specifically, like 2020 was such an eye-opening and critical time within my own family. Like what's happening with racial injustice, what's happening with the inequities of the pandemic and quarantine, being stuck with family members, like there's no way around it, right? And for me, you know, at first I thought it was like maybe because I'm being more critically conscious, maybe because I'm a young adult that I'm like more open to, you know, calling out my parents and so forth. But I feel like it's a mix of things. Like it's a mix of having my own voice, like growing up of like, you know, just keep my head down. Like I always have to listen to my parents and elders. Like they're always going to be right. I don't have a say. I don't have an opinion. But then, you know, like there's a reason why we go to school. There's a reason why they push us to get an education. And it's like they get so like Mr. Crab me and we're like, wait, what? You have an opinion? You know what we're talking about? It's like, yeah, of course. We go to school, we learn. So shocking irony to that. But like to that question and to what you were saying, Jovi, like for me, you know, the catalyst of the huge trauma of the murder of George Floyd and the sanctioned police violence really sparked a lot of conversation in my family about anti-Blackness within the Filipinx community, within the Filipinx culture, right? Talking about white supremacy and colonialism. And, you know, I've been really pissed because my parents are like explicitly like Trump Republican supporters, talked about, you know, stereotyping the Black community. And so for me, what I had to do set those boundaries was really call them out on it, right? Like I am not doing any justice to just like allow my parents to talk and say those things within the household, and for me to not voice my opinions is doing causing more harm. And so for me, like having those tough conversations, and I know a lot of people, it may not be just easy to just call it out, but in my experience, like I know I have a loud and confident voice, and I've always been that type in my family where I'm unapologetic to what I say. And so I've had like heart to heart conversations, and my mom and I cried about like different conversations about family. Um, and you know, like even recent events with the rise of anti-Asian violence, and if y'all heard about what happened to the death of Angelo Quinto, right? Like talking about these like the tension between like specifically Black and Asian communities recently in America, and trying to have those conversations of like we can fight, you know, racial inequity without being anti-Black and pro-police. And so like those are the kind of conversations that I think that is community care, what you're saying, Jovi. But also at the same time, like, you know, I have to protect my soul and sanity and spirit at the same time, because sometimes like when I do have this conversation, it feels like it's going nowhere. And it's always like one of those things where like, you know, my parents are old. Like, are they really gonna learn? Like I recently, like a few months ago, got in a argument with my dad talking about Columbus founding America and, you know, Magellan founding the Philippines. And I'm like, you know, questioning me because like I was born in the Philippines and you're born in America. You don't know Philippine history. You know, like that kind of like, all right, you're set in your old ways of this mentality and like not believing in, you know, your own children's knowledge. And so I also had to just recognize and take a step back, like, is it worth my own well-being? Do I have the capacity to keep going? Like, yes, you know, progressively, but like I cannot just always be doing like that really tough work, right? Because it really takes a toll on the body. So like understanding like I need to find that fine line of like doing the work, but also like I need to do it. I need to also put my energy somewhere else where I know I feel loved and working on myself.
Yeah, 100%. I feel that both of you said it. It's rough work and it's continuous work that we have to like constantly do. And I think, I mean, I personally also operate from this space of like do all things with love, and also like at the end of the day, recognizing that our parents and our family members are also doing the things with love, but it's just like their own kind of thinking and different ways of growing up and different things of being informed. And I think like when I try to set boundaries and when I want to speak up and when I engage in this kind of emotional work in conversations and tough conversations, I one big thing that I like to do is, you know, lean on community members who are like-minded, and use tools that they've learned within their family. So for example, the Ocampo family like came together, like brothers and sisters, Anthony Ocampo and his like family of younger generation came together and wrote the toolkit for like a conversation on race and anti-Blackness at the height of the Black Lives Matter protest during the summer. And that was really helpful. I attended like this Zoom event where they presented it at, and it was really helpful to see that like other families are having this conversation, and it's like something that we can all share what we've learned from these conversations and share our approaches. And you know, everybody has a different type of love language. It's just trying to approach approach our family and change their thinking and change their, you know, thoughts, rigid thoughts when it comes to racism, when it comes to anti-Blackness. Plant those seeds little by little. And I think when we're doing that work consistently, and when we're doing that work in community, I think that's been easier to like not burn out too quickly and too fast. But yeah, I appreciate you both reflecting on like preserving your own self-care and mental sanity in that process, because it's a confusing and tough process to be a part of. But I guess like we lean on each other and you know, have that support of our community at the end of the day.
Thank you so much, everyone, for like sharing. I'm so sorry. I was helping my mom with her phone. She accidentally pressed this, so I'm trying to like reset the phone. So sorry, but I was listening, and that was actually really valuable what you guys mentioned, especially what you said, Josie, about how it's so important to not only call out our family, and also have this tough conversation as well, because it is through having this tough conversation with our family that can really help us understand one another. And with that said, especially with what's been going, the recent events that's been happening with the justice for Angelo Quinto, and more, and also the anti-Asian, it's important to have like conversation that kind of revolves around how can we um, how can we include our parents, and how can we have this conversation, because I think even I have like a like my dad is very political, and every time I would have like conversation in regards to like what's happening with like the president, like Trump, and I try to say something about it. He's like, you don't know this. I know it more. And I'm like, okay. So it's also taking the time to listen to them and being able to understand like where they're coming from as well. And then feel free to have any comments from each other as well.
Yeah, I like what you said, Athena, and you too, Jeren, about that. Those the idea of planting seeds and coming to terms that you're not gonna change your family's minds in one go. You know, that it's always a process, that it takes intense labor and patience. And I think that's just part of our roles as change makers. One thing that I want to share, but I don't think I can credit this person because I do not have their permission. One thing that came to mind is that I was having a conversation with fellow Filipinos and fellow Filipino entrepreneurs here, and we were talking about this very topic of how do we call in our family members about racism, about all of this inequities that are happening to Black and Indigenous communities. And one of my friends told us that they kind of hacked their parents' email account and subscribed them to a bunch of radical newsletters. So it would come into their emails and they would read it, see it on a regular basis, which is honestly such a fantastic idea. I have to get back to you, Chachie, if I can credit this person, but yeah, just one piece on how you can be planting seeds slowly and doing the labor in a way that is also keeping you sane, but very effectively.
I hella love that. That's hella funny. Um, I agree, and I think, Athena, what you were saying. I think at the end, like I think we need to shift our understanding of like mental health, as not individualistic, but like the need for collective care, right? Because, you know, in our society, we're so like solely like we're only taught to like care and fend for ourselves versus like really being community and help each other grow and love. And so when we start to shift that mentality and understanding that like we're all going through this collective grief, collective trauma, that we need to hold each other accountable in our own growth and hold each other for our community, right? Because who's going to protect us, right? Our community is. So that need of solidarity and liberation for all of us um, is needed against these systems of oppression. So I think that's not talked about enough. And I feel like we always talk about self-care, and you know, those values are very strongly tied, but I think we need to broaden the sense where like, what can we, how can we start shifting from, you know, the self to like, how can we support each other in that process? So I love that you talked about that.
No, definitely. I also thought of like that idea that like animosity towards each other is not going to help anything, but like when we redirect that like energy towards like dismantling the systems of oppression that have, you know, screwed up our relationships and screwed up our families and ancestors' mental health, like that's something that is powerful, and that's like motivating me to like really engage and keep and hold accountable and hold close my own family, so that it's not, you know, us against each other, but us against them and like the people in power and privilege. So yeah.
100% agreed. And I think Jaren and Jovi and Athena, you guys can brought up a really big point that instead of just focusing on ourselves, like how can we really focus as a collective, as a whole? And because we live in America, which is so individualistic, it kind of missed this point of like how can we really take care of one another instead of just always trying to focus in um our needs into like growing our needs itself. So with that said, it's safe enough to move on to the next question, which is how can we bring mental health into conversation with our family? And I think we briefly kind of touched touch upon this from the previous question, but if you want to elaborate a little bit more.
I really like that strategy about subscribing to emails. That's such a good way because like the information, you know, when it comes from you and yourself only, like they'll be like, questionable source. But if you're, you know, sending them information from people who are like reputable or news or sources that they trust, like that's something that that our parents and family can like take as like as valid, I guess. So like for example, like Dr. Kevin Adal, Dr. EJR David, like those are two scholars who's written on like intergenerational trauma, psychology in Filipino American communities. I bought my dad actually for his birthday 1 year, Brown Skin, White Minds, by Dr. EJR David. So it's, you know, letting them read from other sources that are not yourself. That is such a good you know, tool to keep the conversation about mental health going. And also another tip or another thing that I like to personally practice is if I find a practice or if I find something myself that I like doing for my own mental health or like exploring for my own mental health, I'm like, hey, to my parents, like this is something I've been doing, or this is something that's like been coming up. I mean, like talking about it with my sister has been really helpful. Definitely thinking about the ways that and different practices that are actively the steps that we can actively take in bettering our own mental health. So our parents can take those similar steps as well. Yeah, is my 2 tips.
That is so amazing. That's hella funny. Yeah, I recently just bought that book, and those are dope scholars. Like I met them both last year because like my mentor teacher, like she grew up with them, and she's like big in the community. I think maybe y'all have even heard her. I call her Ate, but it's Dr. Allison Tintianco Cubales. She coined like Panayism and talks about the Panay experience. Yes, so some of y'all know her. Yeah, but I think to that point, I don't know who tweeted this specifically. I think it was the author who wrote the Latinos of Asia. I think it was Anthony Ocampo. Don't quote me on this, but someone like one of those scholars like tweeted about how they created a presentation for their family members, not necessarily around specifically mental health, but around like anti-Blackness within the Filipino community. I think it was him, but I thought that was hilariously like clever and different. For me, like to answer this is kind of tough because I feel like this is going to be understandable for a lot of people in their own families. Like I feel like there's not an easy solution, nor maybe there is a solution at all in some of these cases. Because I feel like the conversations that I've had with my own friends and about their parents, mental health is non-existent to them, even when it's talked about. And so as you know, like that whole adultism of like, you know, your kid not knowing or we're smarter than them, that whole like ideology really puts a tension on us young uh, Filipinxes, right? And so for me, like even talking about it, it just seems like a very tense and hard conversation. Like I can just, I mean, you know, like the easy solution I can tell y'all is like be straight up, right? Be honest, be vulnerable. But like that vulnerability is like so hard to just open up knowing that your parents might not listen or acknowledge your own mind, body, heart, and soul when it comes to what you say. And so for those, you know, who understand that, I think, you know, I think the alternatives or the way to reframe it is like seeking maybe family that isn't necessarily blood. Like I mean, you know, like cousins, siblings, like having those conversations, because sometimes like you know, as hard as you try with, you know, old elders, family members, um, what happens when they don't listen? So I think my like way is like how do we find alternatives and others, like other sense of community and family members that we can go to as an alternative.
Yeah, I love all of this tips. I think for me, a couple of things that come to mind is one thing that I've learned from Cyrus Marcus Ware, an activist and co-founder of the Black Lives Matter here in Canada, is um, reframing how we see darkness. And the way I see it is a lot of it can be poured into a lot of that concept can be poured into educating our family members, because we always see as a society, we see darkness as something that's bad, something that is negative. But reframing the way we see darkness, and that dark can also be beautiful, and that dark can also be something magical. And yeah, and just that teaching made me think of how we as a community also places our perception of darkness, and in return places our perception of racism and anti-black racism, and how we manifest that in our community. With that being said, one thing that I learned so much from Ashley Caranto Morford, a person that I work closely with doing the work of educating Filipino community, Filipinx Filipino community in anti-Black racism and anti-indigeneity, is always centering Black and Indigenous joy in this work. So when sharing resources to family members, when talking about cultures and histories and anti-Blackness and anti-indigeneity, always centering the work of Black and Indigenous people. Yes, there are struggles, but at the same time, letting family members know, letting our community know that there's so much richness, there's so much beauty and joy in the work that they do in their existence. So a lot of it is reframing, right? A lot of it is slowly changing their minds as to how they really see certain communities. I think the second piece for me is letting folks know that I make mistakes, that I am not an expert, and that it's okay if they make mistakes too, because we all live in such a white normative colonial world. We were brought up in such colonial upbringing that there's no way we're not going to make mistakes in this process and in this work. So reassuring that you can make mistakes together, that you can call in each other as you do so, that you're there to relearn and unlearn with each other. I think that's a huge piece, and a huge, I guess it helps reassure our family members that, it's safe to learn all of this and unlearn all of this together.
I was just going to say, let's just take a few moments to just take in everyone's response because you guys actually tied it in really well. I think when it comes to that was actually really powerful what you said, Jovi, reframing how we see the darkness. And because I feel like that is one thing that I think we should continue and to continue acknowledging is that we see how we grew up thinking that darkness is kind of negative, but once we kind of really engage and acknowledge our history, really see that there is a sense of purpose in anything that we go through. So I think that was kind of really beautiful way to tie it in. And if you have, if you guys have any others to comment in as well, you may feel free to do so.
Yeah, I can. I really like the point you said, Jovi, about really not just centering the oppression of Black and Indigenous folks, but reframing it, or not necessarily reframing it, but also shedding more light on Black and Indigenous joy. I think that's a crucial part. Um, Definitely as a teacher, it has been, definitely interesting on the online context, because the first catalyst of like of a teacher, issue in a classroom was when I was starting my systems and power unit, and one young Filipino in my class, we're talking about social problems, we're talking about BLM, and he starts saying in the chat, Black people are oppressed, right? There was white endangered slaves, like all of this, citing Wikipedia, and the whole chat was going like upset for an hour and 30 minutes. The whole period, they were just arguing with each other. And for me, and growing up with ethnic studies, I didn't feel like I fully understood the different systems of oppression. I was very complicit as a Filipino. Like, if I'm not affected by it, then I shouldn't really care, right? I did not recognize that ties of liberation, right? Like of all Black, Indigenous, and POC folks, like all of our liberations are tied in our freedoms. And so I think about that point of like, we need to not just talk about the oppression of Black lives or the erasure of indigeneity, but also like their survival, their resistance, their resiliency, right? Because indigenous people are still here, right? Like we always talk about it as a past rather than futurity, right? Even Black joy. And so I love that you touched upon that point, and I think that's like me taking it as a teacher to always like center that work too, and not just talk about those systems, like effects of systems of oppression. So
Just wanted to wait a couple of seconds if you guys had anything else to add on. I think so far, like from the beginning to the middle of our conversation, I really see so much value and within how we really understand not only ourselves but understanding this idea of collectiveness and being able to tie it into the value that Jovi said, this Bayanihan kind of spirit, especially when we're talking about not only our community and culture, but how we truly pass it on to our generation that comes before after us. So going to focus in a little bit more on this last question is what, especially as community organizers in our community, how and what is your best practices of giving yourself self-love, self-care, and also managing symptoms?
can start us off real quick. So the way like I break down mental health and the way that I do it for myself and my students is in like four main categories, right? Because I think when people think about mental health, it's only like mental mind space, but I think it's like bigger than that, right? We got to think of it more holistically and intersectionally. So I think of it like more mind, body, soul, spirit, and heart or emotion. And so for me personally, like what I do that really integrates my own self-care and into my daily life are things like in the physical realm, it's more like working out, hiking, being active on that sense, understanding my own breathing, meditation. Um, I began journaling. I started to reflect and write out my own thoughts with my students at the same time. Um, Watching, learn. I think continuously learning. I mean, as a teacher, you're always learning and you're always you know curriculum from your students and so forth. So I think that's also a sense of a strength for mental health. um but I think just doing things for yourself, like your passions, your hobbies that you love personally, for me that's like wanting to travel, wanting to give back to my community, wanting to always be in community, because I'm such an extrovert. I'm like an ENFJ kind of person. And so I always say like I'm nothing without my community, in the sense where like my community is the reason why I'm here and the person I am. So like I said earlier, like I love shifting the whole like self to community. And so, being in community and doing all those practices, I think is humanizing and part of my holistic, self. And so, yeah, that was just a snapshot of it, but
No, yeah, I really love that view of like holistic and multidimensional mental health and well-being. That's definitely something I've like been trying to navigate throughout my journey. What's been something that's good for me. I've been like, and it's also really important to understand myself for the ways I feel like nourished, in the ways I feel empowered in certain spaces, and feel that throughout those different dimensions of my health. I think it's also like knowing, I've dipped into astrology a lot, and I'm a Libra sun, Virgo moon, Cancer rising, Libra Venus. So that is just like, awareness of self and thinking about like these different ways we get to know ourselves and our own bodies and our own spirits, like is something that has been so important to me, because like the more I know myself and what makes me happy or upset or any range of emotion in between, like has really helped me kind of stabilize my emotions and keep track of where I'm at, And then also, I think like one big thing that I've been doing to practice self-care recently is nourishing my inner child. So like really getting to watch the shows, taking breaks to watch the shows that I've loved when I was a kid, or like eating snacks that I grew up on, or cooking food that I like make me feel home, and Filipino food especially, either ordering from the restaurants nearby or cooking it in my own place, and rediscovering all the things that I loved when I was a child, is something that's been nourishing me, because it nourishes both like, I guess, my roots. It makes me feel connected, and it makes me feel um, centered on my core sense of self. Um, and I think it's been really beautiful as I like tried to navigate mental health and the systems and the symptoms that have come out, like seasonal depression that the winter in New York City has brought about. But the sun was shining today and I was happy. So like definitely capitalizing on those moments as well has been strong for me.
Yeah, those were really beautiful, you two. That's yeah, I love all of those very specific practices. When I get asked this question, I always say rest, resistance, and not give a fuck. We live in a society that really loves exploiting Black and brown bodies, Black and brown labor, and I follow, I don't know if y'all follow, but I follow the nap ministry, and I always love seeing content there about rest, and about rest is resistance, rest is power, and rest is, you know, an active activism. Definitely resistance, and not giving a fuck about the societal expectations of unrealistic ways of producing and unrealistic expectations of being successful, and just going about ways as to, or going about my life in ways that makes me happy, in ways that I truly am, in ways that feeds my soul and my identity. I love all of those very specific practices that you've both said, because I too journal. I love journaling. I believe in the power of journaling. And Jaren, just want to say your students are very lucky to have you as their teacher. If you are really teaching them all of this beautiful nuances in life. And Athena, I was very happy today too, because there's so much sunshine here in Tacorono. I cannot believe how beautiful the sunshine is after such a long week of really cold winter storms. And I feel so close to you. We're probably the closest, right? We're probably the closest. But yeah, those small things makes me happy and makes me cherish what is around me. And it really implores myself to recognize those small bits of happiness and build that into something that I can feed off, I can build that into something that makes me feel more powerful, that makes me feel more energetic, and that makes me feel more that the person that I am. So yeah, I think there's a lot about that you all already mentioned about our ways of being, about how we walk this life. But to those, whenever this get uploaded, to those viewing us, if you've reached this part of the video, and if you haven't catched on this yet, our mental health is a huge, it gets impacted by the systemic issues that are around us. That's why I'm going to quote my amazing friend and a beautiful person overall, a beautiful Filipino I know, Carla Villanueva Dunan. Our healing starts when we start dismantling the oppressive systems that brought us here. So yeah, I think it's a sweet way to end it at that quote.
That's I really enjoyed having this conversation with every one of you guys. Like you really bring so much through to the table. And with that said, I wanted to end kind of this Kwentuhan with a grounding meditation, just to kind of like reflect everything that we kind of went over, especially because um, I think it's really helpful to just have like sense of mindfulness after every conversation. So when you guys are ready, find a relaxed, comfortable position. You could be seated on a chair, the floor, on a cushion. Keep your back upright, hand resting where they're comfortable, and try to notice the shape of your body, its weight, and let yourself feel relaxed and become curious about your body seated, the sensation that is experienced, the touch, the connection with the floor or the chair, and relax any areas of tightness or tension. And just breathe. Feel the natural flow of your breath. Inhale, outhale. Notice where you feel your breath in your body. It might be in your abdomen, it might be in your chest, or your throat, or in your nostril. See if you can feel the sensation of your breath. One breath at a time. When one breath ends, the next breath begins. And now, as you do this, you might notice that your mind may start to wander. You may start to think about other things, about what happened throughout your day. And if this happens, it's not a problem. Don't worry, it's natural. Just notice that your mind has wandered, and you can say thinking or wandering in your head softly, and focus in one phrase, one value that keeps you going every day if you ever get distracted. And gently redirect your attention right back into the breathing. Stay here for 5 to 7 minutes. Notice your breath. After a few minutes, once again, notice your body, your whole body sitting there. Let yourself relax even more deeply and offer yourself some appreciation for doing this practice today, for being in this conversation, this Kwentuhan, this Tungtungan session. And once you're ready, you can go back into reality. 3, 2, 1. Thank you guys for joining me in that grounding meditation. Sometimes it's so hard to find silence in our daily lives because of everything that's happening. And I thought it was very fitting to include this at the end of the conversation. And I just wanted to open up the floor if you wanted to share your experience and how you feel, especially as we went through this conversation. It, not only in regards to mental health, but within talking about our community.
You did a really great job facilitating, sis. Thank you for bringing us to the table, having these conversations. I mean, it's like I'm always astonished by how you connect so many people and so many different places and so many like walks of life or experiences, and just kudos to you, Chachie. That's my reflection. In thinking and talking about mental health, like it's inspired me, and it feels very refreshing to be in this space to talk about these issues, to be in solidarity with all of you, and it kind of like encourages me to keep doing this work in various communities.
So yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chachie, for bringing us all together, all from different parts of the Western Hemisphere. I was gonna say whole world, but we're not that far in a sense. But yeah, this space was definitely healing in itself, with the conversation of mental health. And it was such a sacred space, it being on Zoom. And we're all in Kapwa together. So I think that's what's so humanizing and so loving about what we do in our own personal lives, but also in this space. Um, and I, like Athena was saying, like I was just so inspired, and I hope these conversation and this is just the beginning of building our community with each other, because I think we need, like we always just like what we said throughout this past hour was that we need each other in our own community. You know, even though we're 1,000 miles apart, doesn't mean that we cannot be in community. In terms of these kind of conversations and working together. So again, I appreciate being among such amazing fly Pinayas up in here. So appreciate y'all for the conversation.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And thank you, Chachi, for hosting and for bringing us together and all other Filipinas, Filipinos, and Filipinx that you've hosted in this space because it truly is magical. I mean, it's midnight over here and I feel like I'm not going to be able to sleep after this. I'm like hella energized. Yeah, I'm so excited and so grateful to be in space with you, Jeren and Athena, and hear all of your amazing teachings and experience and knowledge. Yeah, I'm taking so much away from this space, and I can't wait to post this video on Facebook and tag my mama and my lola. I'm so excited. But yeah, thank you all so much. Maraming salamat.
And last but not least, speaking to my native tongue, Agyamanak kada kayo amin. Thank you very much for sharing this space with me. And I guess a little shout out. I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for actually Athena. She is actually one of the reasons why she really inspired me into continuing my Filipinx journey. She was my first kind of like role model. We knew each other since high school, and at the same time, I'm also very appreciative for Jovi with Pinay Collection because it's through just reading what you have to wrote, and Jaren, your blog post. I know that you said that it's your only first draft, but thank you for honestly sharing that. And it's through this collective spaces that really just bring us together, even if we're just virtual in a virtual screen. It really has so much impact within me. And I think with that said, I think it's safe to say that if you have anything that you would like to share with the audience, upcoming event, or anything that you're doing that you want us to support you, feel free to share. And I'm gladly to open up this space for you to share.
I can go first since I went last the last conversation. If folks want to check out, I guess, Pinay Collection, feel free to go to pinaycollection.com or at Pinay Collection for any merch that will make your tita say shit or that will make your tita's eyebrows go up. We are also hosting on an ongoing basis conversations about anti-Black racism and anti-indigeneity in the Filipino community. I don't think this will be uploaded before the next event, which will be on Feb 28th, but we do this events on an ongoing basis. So if folks wanted to be engaged, feel free to check out our handles or our website, and we'd be happy to be in conversation and to be in space of unlearning and relearning with fellow Filipinos, Filipinas, and Filipinx in the diaspora. So yeah, thanks for having me.
It's me following your Instagram handles right now. Love that. I don't have personal things to shout out, but shout out my Instagram to see upcoming things. Athena Silog is my Instagram handle, because you can never go wrong with rice and egg. But also, a lot of these conversations I've been having and being a part of on this new app called Clubhouse, which I also roped Chachie into downloading as well. So it's only currently on Apple iOS, but because it's in its beta phase, and it's invite only, so you can DM me to anyone who needs an invite. Let me know, and we can get you connected. There's a whole lot of Filipino community that's growing within this app. It's kind of like an interactive podcast. It was what people like to call it. So you can just like join into these rooms where people are having topics and conversations and unpacking a lot of fun and interesting and timely events and things happening. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't have any plug necessarily either, but I guess for all the audience and viewers, like I love these conversations. I'm such a chatty person. I'm all about having those deep critical dialogues. And so as a teacher, I love learning off of people and providing that space to really grow with one another. And so for anyone, right, like this is like one of those times where like I really love to just like I'm down, right? Like I'm down to just meet people, talk to the Filipina XO community about issues, what we can do to organize, anything in the educational field that I can connect to. So I think not necessarily a plug, but if you want to connect, I'm like definitely, and with you two, continuing that connection, I think it would be radical. So that's my only plug.